My wife cheated on me for 6 months, and I only found out because she forgot to log out of her email on my laptop. I was sitting there in my garage workshop on a Tuesday evening just trying to check the weather, when her inbox popped up with messages that made my stomach drop to the floor. 15 years of marriage, and there it was. Love notes to some guy named Derek, planning their next workout session at the Sunset Motel on Highway 9. If you've ever had your world crumble in 60 seconds flat, if you've ever felt that cold punch in the gut when trust dies, settle in, friend, because this coffee's about to get real bitter, real fast. And if you like stories about regular folks dealing with the worst kind of betrayal, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got plenty more where this came from, and none of them have fairy tale endings. I sat there staring at that screen for what felt like hours, reading message after message. Can't wait to see you Thursday, baby. My husband's working late again. Perfect timing. You make me feel alive again. Each word was like a nail in the coffin of everything I thought I knew about my life. Linda had been coming home from her yoga classes with that satisfied glow I used to think was from exercise. Turns out I was half right. She was definitely getting a workout. The worst part wasn't even the cheating itself. It was how stupid I felt. All those late nights she claimed to be at book club. All those weekend trips to see her sick sister in Phoenix. All those times she said she was too tired for intimacy with me, but apparently had plenty of energy for Derek, the personal trainer. I'd been living with a stranger who wore my wife's face and ate my cooking and slept in my bed. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of evidence. Photos they'd sent each other. Details about their rendezvous that made me sick to my stomach. Plans for their next meeting. Tomorrow night, Thursday, at their usual spot. Room 237 at the Sunset Motel, same as always. She even wrote about how she'd bring extra supplies to make the night special. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen, where Linda was making dinner like nothing had changed. She looked up and smiled that same sweet smile she'd given me for 15 years. "Hey honey, how was your day?" she asked, stirring the pasta sauce. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that pot of sauce against the wall. Instead, I just said, "Fine, just fine." Because sometimes when your world ends, you don't get to make a scene. Sometimes you just have to swallow the poison and figure out what to do next. That night, lying next to her in bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to beg or plead or make a fool of myself. If Linda wanted to play games, I'd show her that two could play. And Derek, the personal trainer, was about to learn that some workouts are more intense than others. I remember the day I first met Linda like it happened yesterday, not 15 years ago. She was working at the diner on Maple Street, wearing this bright yellow uniform that made her hair look like spun gold in the afternoon sunlight. I'd just finished my shift at Morrison's auto shop, hands still greasy despite scrubbing them raw, when I walked in for my usual coffee and pie. She looked up from wiping down tables and gave me this smile that made me forget every word in the English language. "You look like you could use more than just coffee," she said, noticing the exhaustion in my eyes. I'd been working double shifts for months, trying to save enough money to buy my own garage. "How about I throw in some of Martha's apple pie on the house? You mechanics keep this town running." That was Linda, always taking care of people, always seeing the good in everyone, even in a stranger covered in motor oil who probably smelled like transmission fluid. We started talking that day and never really stopped. She'd work the evening shift, and I'd come in after closing my shop, helping her clean up while we shared stories about our dreams. She wanted to go back to school someday, maybe become a teacher. I wanted to expand my business, hire some good people, build something that would last. We made plans sitting in those red vinyl booths, drawing our future on napkins between coffee refills and stolen kisses when her boss wasn't looking. Our wedding day was small but perfect. Linda's mama cried through the whole ceremony, and my dad actually smiled, something I hadn't seen him do since Mom passed. We couldn't afford much, but Linda made that little church basement look like a palace with flowers from her own garden and Christmas lights strung up everywhere. Her dress was from the consignment shop, but she looked like a princess to me. When we danced to At Last by Etta James, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. The early years were tough but good. We lived in that tiny apartment above Peterson's hardware store, sharing one bathroom with paper-thin walls and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. But we were building something together. Linda would bring me sandwiches at the shop during lunch, and I'd surprise her with wildflowers I picked on my way home. We'd spend Sundays in bed reading the paper and planning for the house we'd buy someday, the kids we'd have, the life we were going to create together. Linda stood by me through everything. When my shop almost went under during the recession, she took extra shifts at the diner and never once complained about eating beans and rice for dinner 6 nights a week. When I threw out my back and couldn't work for 2 months, she held down 2 jobs and still came home smiling, rubbing my shoulders and telling me we'd get through it together. "That's what marriage is," she used to say. 2 people pulling the same wagon in the same direction. But somewhere along the way, we started pulling in different directions. She got her job at the insurance office and started wearing nicer clothes, talking about coworkers I didn't know. I expanded the shop and started working longer hours, coming home too tired to really listen when she talked about her day. We stopped having those Sunday morning conversations. We stopped making plans. We just started existing side by side instead of living together, and I was too comfortable to notice when comfortable became lonely for her. The signs were there for months before I found those emails, but I was too blind to see them. It started with small things that seemed innocent enough. Linda staying late at work more often, claiming her boss needed help with some big project. She'd come home energized instead of tired, talking about how fulfilling it felt to be appreciated for her contributions. I was happy for her. Thought it was great that she was finally getting recognition after years of being overlooked. Then came the yoga classes 3 times a week. Linda had never shown any interest in yoga before, but suddenly she was buying expensive workout clothes and a fancy mat. "It's really helping with my stress levels," she'd say, stretching in ways that made me wonder where she'd learned those moves. She looked good, better than she had in years. Her skin glowed, she lost weight, and she started buying lingerie that somehow never made an appearance in our bedroom. The phone calls were the next red flag. Linda had always been chatty with her girlfriends, but these conversations were different. She'd step outside to take them, or go into the bathroom and talk in hushed whispers. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say it was her sister or someone from work, but her voice had this secretive tone that made my stomach twist. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at her phone in a way that reminded me of how she used to look at me when we were dating. Our intimacy disappeared completely around month 4 of what I now know was her affair. Linda suddenly had headaches every night, was too tired from her new workout routine, or had early meetings that required her to get to bed early. When I tried to initiate any kind of physical contact, she'd stiffen up like I was bothering her. "I'm just going through a phase," she'd say, turning away from me in bed. "Give me some time to figure things out." The cruelest part was how she started picking fights with me over nothing. I'd leave my coffee cup in the sink instead of the dishwasher, and she'd explode about how I never helped around the house. I'd suggest we watch a movie together, and she'd complain that I never wanted to do anything exciting anymore. Every conversation became a minefield, and I started walking on eggshells in my own home, wondering what I'd done wrong to make my wife so angry with me all the time. She began working out at a new gym across town, claiming it had better equipment than the community center we'd been members of for years. "You wouldn't like it," she'd say when I offered to join her. "It's really intense, and you've got your back problems." Looking back, I realized she was protecting her secret, keeping her 2 worlds separate. Derek worked at that gym, and I was the inconvenient husband who couldn't be allowed to accidentally discover their little arrangement. The final straw before I found the emails was when she forgot our anniversary. 15 years of marriage, and she completely forgot. I'd made reservations at Romano's, the same place we went for our first real date, but when I mentioned it that morning, she looked confused. "Oh, Mike, I'm sorry. I already made plans with the girls tonight. Can we do something this weekend instead?" But we never did. That weekend came and went with her at another yoga retreat, and I spent our anniversary eating a frozen dinner alone, wondering when I'd become so forgettable to the woman I loved. A Thursday night came, and I knew exactly where Linda would be. She'd told me she was going to her book club and would be home late, maybe grab dinner with the ladies afterward. I watched her get ready with a sick fascination, putting on her best lingerie under a dress I'd bought her for Christmas, spraying on perfume she only used for special occasions. She kissed my cheek goodbye like Judas himself, saying she loved me and not to wait up. I followed her to the Sunset Motel, parking across the street behind a broken streetlight where my truck would be invisible in the shadows. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel steady. Part of me hoped I was wrong, Hoped she'd turn around and come home. Hoped those emails were some kind of sick joke. But at 7:30 p.m., her silver Honda pulled into the motel parking lot, and she walked straight to room 237 like she'd done it 100 times before. 20 minutes later, a black pickup truck arrived and out stepped Derek. I'd looked him up on the gym's website after finding his name in Linda's emails. 6'2", all muscle and cocky smile, the kind of guy who probably never had to work for anything in his life. He was carrying a gym bag and flowers. Actual flowers. Like this was some romantic date instead of the destruction of my marriage. When Linda opened the door, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him like she hadn't kissed me in months. I sat there in my truck for 2 hours watching the light in their window, seeing shadows move behind the curtains. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Book club is running long. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of it made me want to put my fist through the windshield. She was in that room with another man, doing things we used to do together, and she had the nerve to text me about loving me while his hands were all over her body. The worst part was how alive she looked when they finally came outside around midnight. Linda was glowing, laughing at something Derek whispered in her ear, straightening her dress like a teenager sneaking back from prom. This wasn't just sex for her. She was happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. While I'd been killing myself trying to be a good husband, working extra hours to pay for her new clothes and gym memberships, she'd been falling in love with someone else entirely. They kissed goodbye for what felt like forever, hands all over each other like they couldn't bear to separate. Derek said something that made her throw her head back and laugh, that genuine belly laugh she used to save just for me. Then he grabbed her face and kissed her one more time, deep and desperate, before getting in his truck. Linda stood there watching him drive away, touching her lips like she was trying to hold on to the feeling. When she finally got home at 12:45 a.m., I was pretending to be asleep. She slipped into bed carefully, probably thinking she was being considerate of her hard-working husband. But I could smell his cologne on her skin, could feel the satisfaction radiating from her body. She thought she was living in some romantic movie, having her cake and eating it too. Tomorrow night, they had another date planned at the same motel, same room, same time. But tomorrow night, Derek was going to learn that some fantasies come with consequences he never saw coming. I spent Friday moving through my life like a ghost, going through the motions of being a normal husband, while my mind raced with dark possibilities. Linda hummed while making breakfast, practically glowing with anticipation for her evening plans. She'd told me she was going to another yoga intensive, this time an overnight retreat that would help her find inner peace. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. At the hardware store, I found myself standing in the adhesive aisle for 20 minutes, staring at tubes of super glue like they held the answers to all my problems. The plan had formed in my mind sometime during my sleepless night, born from rage and desperation and the kind of clarity that only comes when you've lost everything that matters. It was simple, elegant, and absolutely insane. But insane felt appropriate for what Linda had done to our life together. I bought 3 tubes of industrial-strength adhesive, the kind we used at the shop for emergency repairs that needed to hold under extreme pressure. The cashier made small talk about weekend projects, and I nodded and smiled like I wasn't planning something that would probably land me in jail. Walking back to my truck, I felt completely disconnected from reality, like I was watching someone else make these terrible decisions. Back home, I waited until Linda left for work, then went through her overnight bag with surgical precision. She'd packed her sexiest lingerie, the black lace set I'd given her for Valentine's Day 2 years ago but had never seen her wear. There were candles, massage oil, and a small bottle of personal lubricant, their little toolkit for romance. My hands didn't shake anymore as I carefully emptied the lubricant bottle and refilled it with clear adhesive. The consistency was almost identical. Derek was about to get a lot closer to my wife than he'd bargained for. The rest of the day dragged by like torture. Linda came home from work excited, chattering about how much she needed this retreat, how stressed she'd been lately. She packed and repacked her bag, checking her appearance in the mirror a dozen times. "I might not have cell service at the retreat center," she said, not meeting my eyes. "So don't worry if you can't reach me until Sunday." Sunday. That meant she was planning to spend 2 nights with him, probably some romantic weekend getaway disguised as spiritual enlightenment. I helped her carry her bag to the car, kissed her goodbye, and told her I loved her. Because despite everything, despite the rage and betrayal and humiliation, part of me still did love her. Or maybe I loved the memory of who she used to be before Derek came along and convinced her that 15 years of marriage was worth throwing away for some excitement. Either way, I was about to make sure this would be a weekend none of us would ever forget. That evening I drove to Murphy's bar and ordered a whiskey, just one to steady my nerves. The bartender was Tommy Morrison, whose transmission I'd rebuilt last month, and we talked about baseball and the weather like it was any other Friday night. But inside, I was counting down the hours until my plan went into motion. At some motel across town, Linda was getting ready for the most memorable night of her life, and she had no idea her loving husband had helped make it possible. Saturday morning, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. The caller ID showed Linda's number, but when I answered, it was a man's voice. Deep, panicked, and definitely not my wife. "Is this Mike Thompson?" he asked, and I could hear commotion in the background, radios crackling, people shouting instructions. My stomach dropped even though I'd been expecting this call. "This is Captain Rodriguez with the fire department. Your wife asked me to call you. There's been an incident at the Sunset Motel." The ride to the hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. What had seemed like poetic justice in my rage-filled mind now felt like something much darker and more dangerous. The fire captain had been vague on the phone. "Medical emergency, paramedics on scene. She's conscious, but you should get here fast." I'd created this situation, and now I had no idea how bad the consequences might be. Linda was in the emergency room, covered by a sheet with only her face visible, looking pale and embarrassed and furious all at the same time. When she saw me walk in, her eyes filled with tears that might have been relief or shame or pure mortification. "Mike," she whispered, reaching for my hand like I was still the man she could turn to when everything fell apart. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about everything." The doctor explained the situation with clinical detachment that made the whole thing feel surreal. "Chemical burns, nothing permanent, but they'll need to stay separated until the adhesive breaks down naturally. We've given them both sedatives for the trauma and pain medication for the discomfort." Derek was in the next room, and I could hear him on the phone trying to explain to someone, probably his girlfriend, since apparently Linda wasn't his only extracurricular activity, why he'd be out of commission for the next week. Captain Rodriguez pulled me aside in the hallway, studying my face with the kind of suspicious look that comes from 20 years of seeing domestic situations gone wrong. "Funny thing about that adhesive," he said slowly. "Fire department's seen a lot of accidents over the years, but this one's pretty unique. Almost like someone switched products on purpose." His eyes never left mine. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Mike?" I looked him straight in the eye and shook my head. "My wife told me she was at a yoga retreat. I had no idea she was even at a motel until you called," which was technically true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. He stared at me for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, accidents happen, I suppose, but this kind of accident, it could have been a lot worse. Someone could have been seriously hurt." The warning in his voice was clear. Back in Linda's room, she grabbed my hand with both of hers, tears streaming down her face. "I know you know," she whispered. "I know you found out somehow, and I know I deserve this, but, Mike, I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you like this." Looking at her lying there, humiliated and in pain, the rage that had been driving me for days finally began to fade. What I felt instead was something much sadder and more final. The quiet understanding that our marriage was over, had been over long before I'd found those emails or hatched my ridiculous revenge plot. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment above Rodriguez Auto Parts, which I bought from Captain Rodriguez's brother after our little conversation at the hospital. Linda and I are divorced now, split everything down the middle like civilized adults who'd simply grown apart instead of two people who'd destroyed each other in the messiest way possible. She kept the house, I kept the shop, and we both kept our mouths shut about what really happened that night at the Sunset Motel. The truth is, revenge tastes nothing like you think it will. I thought I'd feel satisfied watching Linda face the consequences of her betrayal. Thought I'd sleep better knowing Derek got a dose of poetic justice. Instead, I just felt hollow and ashamed and older than my 45 years. You don't heal a broken heart by breaking someone else's dignity, and you don't save a marriage by proving how far you're willing to fall when it's already dead. Linda sends me Christmas cards now, And sometimes I see her at the grocery store with a new man. Not Derek, who apparently moved to another state after our little incident became the talk of the town. She looks happy in a quiet way, like someone who learned an expensive lesson about the difference between excitement and contentment. We nod politely when we pass each other. Two people who used to share everything and now share nothing but the knowledge of how badly we both failed at loving each other. Derek never pressed charges, probably because his lawyer explained how that conversation would go in court. Your Honor, I was having an affair with this man's wife when someone replaced her personal lubricant with industrial adhesive. Some stories are too embarrassing to tell, even for justice. He lost his job at the gym when the story spread, lost his girlfriend when she found out about Linda, and last I heard he was working construction in Nevada and keeping a much lower profile. The fire department still talks about that call, though they're discreet about the details. Captain Rodriguez stops by my shop sometimes for coffee and conversation, never mentioning that night directly but always asking how I'm doing, how I'm handling things. I think he knows I've learned my lesson about taking justice into my own hands. Some mistakes teach you everything you need to know about who you don't want to become. Looking back, I understand now that Linda and I had been strangers long before Derek came along. We'd stopped talking, stopped dreaming together, stopped being partners in anything but paying bills and sharing a bed. Her affair was wrong, but it was also a symptom of something that was already broken between us. My revenge was creative, but it was also the final proof that we'd both lost sight of the people we used to be when we were happy. So here's what I learned about betrayal and revenge and the price of both. When someone you love breaks your heart, you get to choose who you become in response. You can become someone who plots and schemes and hurts people back, or you can become someone who walks away with whatever dignity you have left. I chose poorly, but I learned from it. And if you're dealing with your own heartbreak right now, wondering whether to fight fire with fire, take it from someone who got burned. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well enough to tell the story later.